This program is brought to you by Emory University.
And when you look at the different TV shows and you look at Sex and the City, it's actually not very different in some ways from shows that were on in the 70s. That was the time when things really changed for women, both in terms of work roles in society and women's images on TV. So you have the first career women on TV in the late 60s and early 70s with Marlo Thomas and That Girl and the Mary Tyler Moore Show. That was really the one that had a very strong female career woman. And the women in Sex and the City are in some ways quite like her. I think the big difference came with Sex and the City in that they're talking about sex. So it was more the sexual liberation idea and element of that show that got a lot of attention. We hadn't had a lot of that on television prior to prior to that show, prior to the 1990s, because most of television was network. So you couldn't have had a show like Sex and the City because you couldn't talk about those issues on television. With cable, you got a lot of racier content. So I think in some ways it was more the racier content on Sex and the City that grabbed a lot of media attention. I don't think the women are that different in some ways. Sometimes they objectified men. I don't think they do all the time, and that's what's interesting about the show. It starts off where it's a lot more about them just talking about sex and objectifying men, and that is kind of a role reversal. But the show quickly moved from that focus just on sex and sort of having sex with anyone you want and objectifying men to a real focus on relationships. And this is what a lot of critics have talked about with the show, is that in some ways it's quite liberated. In some ways it kind of goes along with feminist notions of career women and women being sexually liberated. But in other ways it's quite traditionally feminine in the focus on romantic relationships. And as the show progresses, the focus is more and more on how do I find Mr. Right, just like millions of other shows about women trying to find their one romantic partner. And most of the characters go through that. So it kind of, it's a very ambiguous show. And that's what a lot of the sort of media and sociology critics have looked at, is the fact that it's ambiguous. It's got some notions of liberated women, but it also has these very traditional notions of women focusing on romance and finding the right partner, which is the flip side of being independent and self-sufficient. I mean, the other element in Sex and the City that really feeds into gender stereotypes is the consumerism, with the women shopping all the time. So that's not sort of challenging notions of what women are supposed to be like. It's feeding into that notion that all women care about is romance and shopping. So that's where it's been criticized by some people as really feeding into our gender stereotypes, not challenging them. Because it's ambiguous, you can focus on the fact that these women are career women and they're independent and they talk about sex, or you can focus on those more traditional sort of melodramatic elements of romance and trying to find the right man and issues about getting married and having kids. All of that stuff comes in. Because you can interpret it different ways, it's what we call an open cultural product, meaning that many people can look at it and view it for different reasons and enjoy it for different reasons. And those are usually the cultural products that are most successful. Ones that are not actually trying to impose some meaning on the audience, but let the audience take the meaning that they want. Again, when you think of Sex and the City, who are the people in that show? They're upper middle class white women in New York City who are thin and attractive and glamorous. How many people are like that in the US? So even people that watch it and enjoy it may not think that they can be like those women. It may be more of a fantasy. Oh, you know, if I was thin and attractive and wealthy, I might be like this, but I'm not, so I'm not going to be sexually liberated like they are. Looking at the history of women on television, other shows have challenged social roles about women more than Sex and the City did. And even now, there are shows on television that portray women more realistically in some ways and with more real sort of confront the struggles that women have more realistically than Sex and the City does. And one of those shows is Desperate Housewives. The woman, Lynette, the character on Desperate Housewives that was a stay-at-home mom and then goes back to work, it shows the realities of those roles without glamorizing them. And that's actually much closer to what real women experience than Sex and the City. So in some ways, there are other shows that challenge social roles more than Sex and the City did. It's just that you don't hear them talked about in the media. So bottom line, I'm not sure it had much effect on society at all. I think the effect it had was to get people to talk about it and maybe to talk about women being liberated sexually.
The preceding program is copyrighted by Emory University.